moving down to the center console, most of the switches here are for actual weapons delivery or arming. Really have no application FSX yet. On the left, though, we have the flare dispenser. This switch here arms it, and we have 4 multicolored flares that can be fired out the back of the aircraft. And they do actually work. On the bottom here we have the hydraulic pressure gauges for the brakes. So left and right needles right here for the wheel brakes, and then the parking brake pressure is there. Just to the left of that here we have 2 trim indicators. They actually don't indicate your trim position, but they indicate when the trim is neutral. So one for roll and one for pitch. It's a way you can check to see before landing or takeoff where your trim is at, if it's in the right place. Okay, so moving into the aft cockpit here in the rear. It's basically all the same stuff back here, but not quite as complete as the front. The L-39 is not certified for solo flight from the rear cockpit. It's purely for instruction or passenger carrying, so not everything is duplicated back here. You don't have a duplicate set of radios or de-ice controls or pitot heat or any of that. So you can operate the aircraft back here in a pinch solo, and you have enough controls to get the engine started and stopped, but that's pretty much it. So just starting with the left console here, we have the same oxygen control, same fuel shutoff, fire extinguisher, emergency, fuel pump, same flat buttons, and we have an engine stop switch as well. We have a Saphir APU starting button, but we don't have a stop one. So to get it shut off, that has to be done from the front cockpit, or of course during engine ignition it will shut off automatically if the ignition is successful. And we have independent instrument light control right here for your rear cockpit instrument lights. The main panel itself is basically the same as the front. You'll find really no differences there, except for the gear handle right here. This is a 3-position switch versus the 2-position in the front. If the gear handle is in the neutral position, which is the middle, the gear can be controlled by the keyboard or from the front cockpit gear handle. If this switch is moved in the up position, the gear is going up, and there's nothing that can be done about it. It completely overrides the keyboard commands and completely overrides the front cockpit selector. And same from when it's down. And here we have a push to test button, same one in the front, that will turn on all of the indicator lights here. On the center console down here is where the real difference in the rear cockpit comes. Here we have the fault simulation control panel. Now this allows you to shut off the pitot system in the front cockpit, and allows you to shut off the static system separately. So you can induce errors in the front cockpit's pitot-static instruments, such as the airspeed indicator, vertical speed, and altimeter, to screw up your student, essentially, to test them on failures. You can also fail the compass by switching that on, and you can fail the directional gyro, so to basically stop at whatever heading it's at if you're in a turn. You can also fail the roll and the pitch of the artificial horizon in the front cockpit independently. Now, whenever you do these switches, all of the instruments in the rear cockpit here continue to work normally. So if you're instructing a student in partial panel IFR flight, say, you can really gauge their performance in dealing with these instrument failures and using the backup indications. On the right console, it's again mostly weapons arming stuff and ejection seat issues, which are not really applicable to FSX, but there is one switch here which is quite important, and it's called the network switch. Now this switch here controls all of the electricity, for the most part, to the front cockpit. If you flick this aft, you've essentially put it lights out to the front pit. So lights will go out, most of the radio navigation instruments will fail, gyroscopes are down because they're electrically powered. The rear cockpit will still have power. The only things in the front cockpit that will still work really are the de-ice controls and the radios. In the rear cockpit here we have the same set of emergency hydraulic levers that we have in the front. So the hydraulic interconnect, which we'll cover a little bit later during emergency videos, and ram air turbine deployment and flaps and gear, and the same pressure gauges. Okay, so back in the front cockpit, I'm going to demonstrate how to start the L-39. So the first step is to make sure our parking brake is on, which it is. If it's in the aft position, the brake pressure is on. And then we can get our battery going. That's this top left switch here. Turn that on, and we're going to turn on the engine instrument inverter as well, so that these triple engine indicators and the EGT will work. At this point we're ready to start the Saphir. So the black button with the white circle, and we'll start the Saphir turbine to get it going. You'll hear it spilling up in the background. A little bit quiet, I've got the sounds turned down so they don't fight with my voice too much. takes about 25 seconds to spool up, and when it does, you will see a turbine starter light appear right here. Okay, turbine starter is ready to start the engine. So go back down to the left console and get the fuel shut off all the way on and guarded, like so. Now to make sure the throttle is at the full idle position. It has a catch on it. Engine will not start unless the throttle is at idle. Once we're ready to do that, we can start the engine. So blue button and depress. And you see the RPM start to come alive, and we should see oil pressure reading begin to rise here. And we have ignition, and the Saphir automatically shuts down when that occurs, or after 10 minutes if there is no ignition. So turn on the main generator right here, emergency generator, connect that to the bus, connect the inverters, the GPS, radar altimeter, the de-ice system, avionics are on, and tanks. This switch over here controls the pressurization of the wingtip tanks as they use up fuel. And a little bit more on that one later during the cruise portion of the flight. Okay, and the final phase of getting the aircraft ready for flight here is to close the canopy. That's this red handle right here. So we'll click that closed. And then we have to pressurize the cockpit. So that's this blue handle right here, the pressurization and canopy seal. And when we turn this on, you'll see the pressure differential rise on this gauge right here as the cockpit is pressurized. And there we go, we're basically ready for flight. You want to have cockpit pressurization on if you're flying really anytime, and if you're flying above 12,000 feet without it, you may start to experience hypoxia effects in this aircraft, and so above 18,000 feet without pressurization on, or without especially the oxygen on right here, you will pass out and crash. Just before we go to the taxi portion and takeoff, I'm just going to cover a couple of last minute items in the cockpit here. You'll see on the left here we have a smoke switch, and when that's on the light glows blue. That's your air show smoke essentially, and that will only work when the engine is on. And up top here we have the gun sight, which is a collimated electro-optical one. Power switch is right there, and you can see the gun sight in the reticle there. Last item on the right here is we have the error GA and synchronization switch. Now this is an indication when the directional gyro down here becomes out of alignment through drift. When it becomes more than 3 or 4 degrees out of alignment, this light will illuminate. If it does, you can reset the gyro down here by pressing this switch right here. And just prior to taxi, there's a few things you want to test to make sure they're working. First of all, we'll check the indicator lights on the top here to make sure they're all powered. There's a little button down here, the little white one. That's your push to test on the indicators. And they're all working. And we'll check the engine vibration, which is this button here, and it should spike this gauge over here up to about 185 degrees. And that works. Last minute test before taxi is disengage parking brake. You'll see the pressure needles drop there, and we'll just test the brakes. Wheel brake left and wheel brake right. And turn on our GPS and turn on exterior lights. You have your nav lights right there, and strobes, beacon, anti-ice on auto mode in case we encounter any. And we're pretty much ready to go.